She said, "I care about you, but I'm no longer in love with you." I simply nodded and replied, "I see the distinction." What she didn't grasp was that this distinction also applied to paying half the rent versus covering it all. It's interesting what you remember after a calamity. I don't recall much from the week following my apartment fire, just a blur of insurance calls and the smell of smoke. Yet, I can vividly recall every moment of the conversation that ignited the fire, destroying my 6-year relationship with Chloe. Now, about 8 months later, I'm finally able to look back and recognize the entire absurd, pitiful story for what it was. I suppose I should begin with that conversation. Every long-term relationship has a few key discussions, but this was the pivotal one. Chloe, then 29, and I, 32, were living in a nice apartment in a city where a nice apartment costs as much as the GDP of a small nation. We were a team, both had solid jobs, split everything evenly, and were making it work. Or so I thought. Chloe, it turned out, was just browsing. She sat me down on the couch, her expression serious, and began her speech. I'm sure you've heard it. The breakup speech for the faint-hearted. The "I want to have my cake and eat it too" manifesto. "Ethan," she began, staring at her hands, "I love you. You're my best friend, but I must be honest. I'm not in love with you anymore." The air seemed to leave the room. She continued, expressing how she felt trapped, how the spark had faded, and how she desired the freedom to rediscover herself. But she quickly added that she didn't want to lose me or our life together. She didn't want to move out. She just wanted us to be best friends who lived together, shared a life, yet were emotionally and romantically unbound. She wanted the perks of our partnership, the shared rent, companionship, and stability, but without any of the responsibilities that come with being partners. Essentially, she was asking me to be her roommate and support her journey of self-discovery. At that moment, I just felt exhausted. I was looking at the woman I had loved for 6 years and realized she was a stranger reciting lines from a script she'd seen on TV. I nodded and said, "I understand the difference." And the relief on her face was palpable. She thought she had pulled it off. For the next 2 weeks, she transformed into a new person. She was carefree, happy, and treated me with the patronizing kindness of a benevolent employer. She went out with friends, stayed out late, and returned home to share stories about the fascinating people she was meeting. She was living her best single life, supported by the safety net of our shared apartment and my steady presence. Meanwhile, I felt like I was trapped in a ghost story. My partner had been replaced by this cheerful, oblivious roommate who looked just like her. The breaking point wasn't emotional, it was practical. I received a letter from our building's management stating that our lease was up for renewal in 60 days, and due to market changes, the rent was increasing significantly, by about $800 a month. I sat down at the kitchen table with the letter and a calculator. Previously, this would have been a team decision. We would have reviewed the numbers, figured out a budget, and made a choice together. Now, there was no team, just me and the friendly ghost of my ex-girlfriend, who was currently humming in the shower after a night out. I did the math. The new rent would be $4,400 per month, meaning my share would be $2,200. I could manage it, but it would be tight. Her share would also be $2,200. That's when it struck me, the stark, harsh reality of the situation. Her newfound freedom was being funded by our old 50-50 agreement. Her journey of self-discovery was being financed by a partnership she had already dissolved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was browsing rental websites for one-bedroom apartments. They were smaller and less nice, but affordable for one person, my person. I found a place I liked in a neighborhood I had always wanted to live in and filled out the application online at 3 a.m. The next day, I received a call. My application had been approved. I had a new apartment, with the lease starting in 3 weeks. That evening, I found Chloe in the living room, absorbed in her phone. "Hey," I said, "we need to talk about the lease renewal." She looked up, irritated. "Can we not discuss boring adult stuff right now? I'm trying to relax." "This will only take a minute," I said, sliding the letter from the management company onto the coffee table. "The rent is going up to $4,400 a month." She glanced at it and scoffed. "Ouch. Well, I guess we'll have to make it work." "No, Chloe," I replied. "We won't have to do anything. The lease is up in 60 days, and I will not be renewing it." She stared at me in disbelief. "What do you mean you're not renewing it? Where are we going to live?" "That's the thing," I said, my voice steady. "There is no we. I found a new apartment, a one-bedroom. I'm moving in 3 weeks, and I'm telling you now so you have almost 2 full months to figure out your own living arrangements. The color drained from her face. This was a scenario she hadn't considered. You got your own apartment. Without me, you're just leaving. You told me you weren't in love with me, I said. That means our partnership is over. I'm not obligated to live with my ex-girlfriend, especially not with the rent being this high. This is the difference between love and being in love. Chloe, being in love means tackling a $4,000 rent together. Just loving someone means wishing them luck in finding a new place they can afford on their own. The meltdown was immediate and dramatic. She accused me of being petty, of punishing her, and of throwing her onto the street. She couldn't comprehend the simple logic of it. She genuinely believed she could alter the fundamental terms of our relationship without facing any consequences. She desired the freedom of being single, but wanted the financial security of being a partner. The following weeks were filled with tense silence and angry whispered phone calls she had in her room. She couldn't afford our apartment alone. She couldn't afford anything even close to it. Her free-spirited friends didn't have a spare room for her. Their apartments were already crammed with other struggling artists. She tried various tactics, crying and saying she'd made a terrible mistake, yelling and claiming I owed her for the 6 years she had invested in me. I kept my head down and packed my belongings. I was no longer her partner. I was just her roommate, and our lease was ending. On the day I moved out, she sat on the floor in the empty living room and watched. My friends who were helping me didn't make eye contact with her. As I carried my last box out the door, she looked up at me, her face pale. "So this is it?" she whispered. "You're really just going to leave me with nothing?" I paused at the door and looked back at her. "I'm not leaving you with nothing, Chloe," I said. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you asked for, freedom. The space to find yourself. No strings attached. It's been 8 months now. My new apartment is smaller, but it's mine. It's quiet, and my life is my own." I heard through a mutual friend that Chloe ended up moving back in with her parents in the suburbs. Her grand journey of self-discovery culminated in her childhood bedroom. She couldn't afford to live in the city without a partner, and it turns out the city is a difficult place to find a new one when you don't have a nice apartment to bring them back to. She wanted to redefine our relationship on her terms, but she didn't realize that relationships, like leases, have terms and conditions. The in-love clause is the most essential one. When you void that part of the contract, the entire agreement is off the table. It wasn't about revenge.